everybody? How's it going today? Episode 18 here, and we got some cutting and a lot of grinding and some more cutting on a dirty, rusty, old rear axle. I got my Ford 888 right here. It's in shambles. I got my housing ends, and then I also placed the order for my Tin Soldier small tire 4-link brackets. And then that way we can go ahead and get this rear end built. Really, I mean, really, it's ready. Once I'm done cutting and getting everything straight, I get the brackets on, weld it together, it's ready to rock. And then at that point, really, I just got to order the spool, some axles to stick in it, and I can get it sitting in the car. So I just kind of want to give a breakdown of what I did. Now, in the car, I had put both tires in the car where I wanted them. I had them spaced from side to side. I was pretty happy with it. I ended up deciding to favor tucking them under the car some more. So going up underneath the car some more. And as much as it pains me to do that because it won't look as good as something that's like super flush, I think that in the long run, it will be better. And then there's also a couple benefits from it. One of the benefits being that it makes the axle actually a little bit lighter because there's a lot of metal when you account for the tube, account for the axle. It's making it just a little bit lighter, just a teeny bit. And then it's also going to make it so much easier to get the wheels and tires off. Being a drag and drive car, doing maintenance on this thing, pulling the wheels and tires off, putting the street tires on is something that I'll be doing. During a drag and drive event, you're doing it multiple times. So you're doing it every day, at least twice, when you get there and then when you go to leave. So, and then me driving it on the street at home, I'll be doing the same thing. I'll plan on driving it on the street with some street tires and putting miles on it and having fun with this thing. So I decided to favor tucking it up underneath the car. So I got the tires up underneath the car. I got the tires square. So I put an angle finder on the rear hub and I got them square from one another. And then I measured at the top of the wheel, from the top of the wheel to this top of the wheel, from that bottom of the wheel to that bottom of the wheel, and made sure that they were parallel. And then I did the same thing from the back of the wheel to the back of the wheel, from the front of the wheel to the front of the wheel, and made sure that it's parallel this way. So I made sure that the two wheels were perfectly parallel to each other and the right distance apart. And then I took all those measurements, made sure that they were good, made sure they were the same number. So if you measure at 4 points on the wheel across to the other wheel at those 4 points, all four of those numbers should be the same distance. And that tells you that those wheels should be perfectly parallel to each other. There should be no twist or turn or anything like that. I was happy where they were spaced. And then I took a measurement from the inside of the hub to the inside of the hub on those two wheels. They're 5.5-inch backspace wheels, and I took a measurement from the inside to the inside. And what I ended up deciding with is going with a 40-inch axle, and that's from hub to hub. Okay, so just to give you a breakdown of what I got going on here, was a 40-inch axle here. This was the rough distance between the two tires. So I got roughly 30.5 inches between the two tires. And then from hub to hub was 40 inches. Okay. Then I knew that I was going to have to cut a ton off of this thing. I think stock was like 59 or 56 inches. Like it was a ton. So I knew that I was cutting a minimum of like 18 inches off this thing. And what I decided to do is I just picked a spot just past these shock brackets, which is, you know, this is only like a 6-inch piece, maybe 7 inches tops. So I just whacked it off there. So it's just less metal I have to clean. Then I started kind of digging at it, cutting these brackets off. I cut both those brackets off and I ground this one. And then I was sitting there looking at it and I went, I should probably measure this thing because I may be doing a lot of cutting and a lot of grinding for no reason at all. And that's exactly what I ended up doing. So I took some measurements from this cast area to this cast area. So basically the full width of the center section, not the tube. So up against this shoulder to up against this shoulder. It should be a relatively centered spot on the housing. What you can do too is measure from like the cap to the outside and then this cap to the outside to kind of make sure that the diff is going to be square in there. But that doesn't necessarily mean exactly where the diff's going to be either. So really you're just looking for a reference point to measure off of tube length wise. So going from here to here, and then that gives you a good spot to measure out to here. So I always measure on the same plane. So when I go to mark this axle, I'll measure it at the same spot up here out this way. Just in case there's like some weird casting shift, I wouldn't measure from over here. I measure in the same spot out to here. And then obviously before I cut, I would measure from here all the way across to the other side. So that's how I go about figuring out how long the tubes need to be. So I measured 16.5 inches on the housing length. Then, so 16.5 inches on the housing length, okay? Then from the axle flange, so like where your wheel bolts up, to the front of this, so from where the wheel bolts up to the front of this, the standard for these axles is 2.5 inches. I think most 9 inches and most 8/8 are 2.5 inches. So when you buy aftermarket axles, everybody pretty much sells them at 2.5 inches. So that's 2.5 inches. And then I stuck this in there to see exactly where it sat. And then I gave a measurement from here to the axle tube. So from this outside flange where my thumb is to the axle tube, because the chamfer itself kind of sticks on the inside there. So I took that measurement, that was 2.25. All right. So after some back mathing, so 2.5 plus 2.25 is 4.75 times 2, subtract it from my 40 inches overall, and that gives me 30.5. Then you take that 30.5, subtract the 16.5, gets 14 inches, divide that by 2, and that gives you 7-inch tubes on each side. So if I was to mark 7-inch tubes, measure it, I should get 30.5. And then I know that if I add this and this to it, it would give me my 40 inches. So that is how I know exactly where I'm going to cut. And that is why I messed up and wasted a bunch of time by grinding these, because if you measure 7 inches, it's, I didn't need to grind those. I could have just cut it. Oh well. So the last hour or more of me grinding, I didn't need to do. That's why you always measure certain things first. Sometimes you can cut it off and it's just less you have to clean up. It's less you'll have to grind. I should have known better that I was probably going to cut more off than the 6-7 inches that I already did. But I just got a little rambunctious with cutting brackets off and cleaning it up. It happens. And then another thing I did is I know that I'm going to do a 24-inch rear section. So my 4-link bars are going to be at 24 inches on center. So the distance between my 4-link bars, center to center, is going to be 24 inches. And then that way the shocks and the shock tab will be right in the center of that upper bar. Okay, because the shock tab will come off of the rear structure on the back of the car. Oh, I got the trunk on. So I'll have the rear structure that comes back over the axle, and the 2 bars, the center of those is where the shock will bolt and then go down to the 4 links. So everything will be 24 inches on center. And then doing that math, just to double check here, I roughly would have 2.5 inches by figuring out the back spacing. So it's a 5.5 inch back space. You add all that stuff together, subtract everything, and you'll end up with 2.5 inches from the outside of the wheel to the center section, which is fine. I figured that I would roughly have anywhere between 2 and 3 inches on the inside of the tire, which is plenty. All right, that was a little long-winded, but I hope that gives you guys a explanation of where I'm going with the axle. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of the brackets cut off. The other two brackets, I should say. I'm not going to bother grinding that one. These two will have to get cut off and ground. So I will cut those off and grind them. And then I'm going to grind, wire wheel, get this thing as clean as possible. Get like 6 cans of brake clean, bathe this thing, clean it up the best I can, and get ready to do some fabrication. I'll probably make a little like jig stand for it so I can like set it up on my welding bench, because the 4-link bars will have some bracing. I'll have to do some front bracing, so some coming off the tubes to the center section and then back. So there'll be some front bracing there. And then the 4-link bar, this is the bottom of it. So the front bracing will actually go to the top. So it'll come off the bar, go to the top, and then go from the top to over there. And then the 4-link will have a bar that runs down here, welds to this, and then to the other 4-link plate. So it'll come across like that. And then here somewhere, I will have to integrate a wishbone mount. I believe it's got to go to the bottom of these axles typically. I'll have to do some more research on where to mount the wishbone and stuff, but the wishbone will be something that'll get welded in after I got my number 1 bar set and all that stuff. So I'm not in a big super hurry to get the wishbone in. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you learned something about how to go about measuring and start cutting the axle. And if there's any steps in this process that you want to see specifically that you notice I skipped over or you got questions about, feel free to leave a comment below. Make sure you like the video, and thank you for watching. Have a good night.